In late November of 1889, Industrial Inspector Elias Thornton returned to Boston from a routine survey. He had a profound sudden hearing loss and an altered set of blueprints, and a physical contradiction that defied the laws of architecture. According to the official structural plans, the very center of the Blackwood Mill contained a sealed, empty brick room. This room measured 4,000 cubic feet, but Thornton was a master of industrial mathematics. By calculating the stress load on the foundational pillars, he proved that the supposedly empty space, it was not empty at all. The room weighed exactly 60 tons more than it should have. When Thornton presented his findings to the mill's director, he was dismissed. His calculations were confiscated, and the room was permanently struck from the public registry. The official explanation for the sealed void in the Blackwood Mill is entirely reasonable. In the late 19th century, American textile factories were highly dangerous environments. To prevent catastrophic fires from spreading through the cotton dust, architects frequently built solid brick dead zones. These were fire breaks into the center of the factory floors. Additionally, the sheer physical vibration generated by hundreds of massive steam-powered power looms. This could easily shake a building to pieces. Heavy, dense masonry cores were often utilized to stabilize the structure and absorb the mechanical shockwaves. According to institutional historians, the room Thornton found was nothing more than an over-engineered structural anchor. It was heavy because it was filled with dense rubble, and it was kept off the main blueprints because it was a last-minute addition by a nervous architect. At first, that explanation was enough. It is clean, practical, and historically plausible. But one detail in the surviving record made the case harder to close. To understand why this detail matters, you must understand the historical world. The 1880s New England industrial boom. These factories were not just workplaces, they were roaring sensory nightmares. Built from millions of red bricks along frozen, fast-moving rivers, the mills were labyrinths of leather drive belts, exposed iron gears, and massive steam boilers. The air was thick with humidity and highly flammable cotton fibers. The noise was absolute, the mechanical clatter of 10,000 shuttles firing simultaneously created a deafening, relentless roar that vibrated through the floorboards and into the bones of the workers. Every ounce of space in these buildings was designed for profit. Floor space was money. The owners tracked every drop of whale oil, every pound of coal, and every inch of yarn in massive, ink-stained ledgers. In a world built entirely for maximum efficiency, deliberately wasting 4,000 cubic feet of prime factory space on a hollow void was an architectural sin. The first crack in the record appears in a surviving winter coal ledger from 1889. The mill foremen were required to keep strict temperature logs to ensure the cotton threads did not snap in the cold. A column in the ledger, recorded during a week of sub-zero blizzards, tracks the ambient temperature of the factory floor surrounding the sealed central room. According to the foreman's meticulous handwriting, the brick wall of the empty fire break was radiating an ambient heat of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Empty brick walls do not generate heat. A pile of structural rubble does not require thermal monitoring. Whatever was adding 60 tons of weight to that space was burning hot in the dark. The men involved in this anomaly did not behave like men who had simply built a heavy wall. Elias Thornton, the inspector who discovered the weight discrepancy, suffered a quiet and devastating human consequence. Upon returning to Boston, his hearing began to deteriorate rapidly. Within a year, he was profoundly deaf. He never accepted another industrial contract. He moved to a remote silent cabin in the deep woods, and according to his family, he lived in absolute terror of vibrations, refusing to even allow a grandfather clock in his home. Arthur Penhaligon, the wealthy director of the Blackwood Mill who ordered the room sealed, stepped down from his position exactly 3 weeks after Thornton's inspection. He dissolved his shares in the company and spent the rest of his life funding acoustic research at a local university. The silence of these men left later researchers entirely dependent on the scattered paper trail. The investigation into the Blackwood Mill must be built step by step, relying on fragments that survived by accident, First, there was the temperature log showing impossible heat. Then, a purchasing order surfaced in a regional railway archive. 6 days before the room was permanently bricked over, Penhaligon ordered a massive freight delivery to the mill. The order was not for cotton, or oil, or loom parts. It was for 5 tons of raw lead and hundreds of thick sheets of acoustic cork. Then, a diary belonging to a young mill worker named Sarah Miller was found in a local historical society. In entries dated just before the sealing, she does not complain about the noise of the looms. She complains about a hum beneath the looms. She describes a low, sickening harmonic vibration rising from the floorboards. That caused the workers' teeth to ache and their noses to bleed. The mystery deepened when architectural archivists finally uncovered the complete, unaltered blueprints in an uncatalogued basement file. It provided a stunning visual scale moment. The sealed space was not a simple square room. It was a massive 3-story parabolic chamber. Shaped like an inverted funnel, the room stretched vertically through the heart of the factory. It was a perfectly designed acoustic isolation chamber, built to capture and contain a specific frequency. Finally, a freight invoice from a local masonry union confirms the end of the story. A crew of 20 men was paid triple their standard wage. They were to line the parabolic chamber with the lead and cork, and then seal the only entrance with 4 feet of solid mortar-heavy brick. This was done in a single night. There is a required skeptical explanation for all of this. Industrial historians argue that the competitive nature of the textile industry led to highly secretive and often highly dangerous experimentation. The skeptical view suggests that the mill owners had secretly installed a new, experimental high-pressure steam turbine, or perhaps a highly volatile chemical dye vat, inside the central chamber. The 5 tons of lead were used to line the vat. The 104-degree heat was simply the residual thermal output of a failing boiler. When the experimental machine proved to be dangerously unstable, perhaps emitting the agonizing hum Sarah Miller described, the owners panicked. Fearing a catastrophic explosion and desperate to hide their expensive failure from their investors, they abruptly shut it down, packed the room with dense acoustic cork to muffle the sound of the cooling iron, and sealed the door. The skeptical explanation is intelligent, calm, and grounded in the cutthroat reality of 19th century capitalism. That would explain the secrecy, but not the science. That would explain the lead, but not the architecture. The official explanation solves the easiest part of the case, but it fails the basic laws of thermodynamics. You cannot seal a heat-generating steam boiler inside a solid brick box with no ventilation or exhaust. Without a way to vent the pressure, an active turbine would have detonated within hours, taking the entire factory with it. Furthermore, an experimental dye vat does not require a massive 3-story parabolic acoustic funnel. The official explanation tries to fit an industrial machine into a space that was clearly designed as an acoustic instrument. The safer explanation is possible, but it is not complete. It does not explain the pattern. The strange part was not that the file was dramatic. The strange part was that it was ordinary. The true nature of the room reveals itself in a quiet, mundane piece of administrative paperwork. In the 1890 Massachusetts state tax records, the Blackwood Mill filed for a property tax exemption for the sealed square footage. They did not classify the space as structural framing or industrial storage. They utilized a highly specific, obscure municipal code. They claimed the space as a biological quarantine zone. Why would a textile factory legally classify a brick room lined with lead as a medical quarantine? This single administrative clue breaks the case open, because it reveals that the Blackwood Mill was not an isolated incident. The pattern slowly emerges across the historical record. In the same winter of 1889, 3 other massive textile mills in different New England states permanently sealed their central cores. All of them ordered massive quantities of lead. All of them recorded strange temperature spikes. But the pattern included one extra, remarkably quiet administrative clue. In the regional post office archives, the telegraph logs from November 18, 1889, show that the directors of all 4 mills exchanged a single synchronized message at midnight. The telegraph read simply, "The resonance is capped." The darkest detail of the case did not emerge until the 1920s, found in the private correspondence of a university geologist studying the bedrock of the eastern seaboard. He noticed a bizarre geographical correlation. The 4 factories that sealed their rooms in 1889 were not just built on rivers. They were built directly atop a massive deep earth fault line that stretched across New England. The climax of the mystery is not that the mill owners were building a secret machine. It is that they had accidentally built a weapon. The synchronized mechanical rhythm of 10,000 industrial power looms bolting into the bedrock had inadvertently acted as a massive seismic tuning fork. The relentless pounding vibration of the factories had resonated with the deep earth fault line, awakening a terrifying low-frequency acoustic anomaly rising from the earth itself. On the page of the geologist's letters, the factories no longer look like buildings. They look like the pins of a massive subterranean music box. The hum that made the workers bleed was not coming from the looms. It was coming from the ground beneath them. The 3-story parabolic chambers were not designed to hold a machine. They were designed to act as massive, heavy acoustic caps. The 60 tons of weight, the 5 tons of lead, and the thick cork were the only things heavy enough to press down on the fault line and silence the earth. They classified it as a biological quarantine because the sound itself was a pathogen. The honest answer is that the evidence is incomplete. Elias Thornton was an aging man, and his hearing loss may have been entirely natural, completely unrelated to his inspection of the mill. Mill owners were famously secretive, and the coordinated telegraphs may have simply been the end of a failed multi-state corporate patent experiment. The original architectural drawings of the parabolic chambers survive only as fragile copies, and the specific geological surveys from 1889 have long been lost. The question survives because the ordinary explanation of a failed steam engine simply does not account for every fragment. What was left behind is a landscape of quiet, heavy bricks. The textile industry eventually collapsed. The factories were abandoned, left to rot along the frozen rivers. But over the last 2 decades, developers have returned. The massive mills have been gutted and transformed into luxury modern loft apartments. The old looms are gone, but the central brick blocks remain. Because they are filled with 60 tons of lead, solid masonry, and impenetrable cork, structural engineers have repeatedly declared them too heavy and too dangerous to demolish. They have simply been drywalled over, absorbed into the floor plans of expensive real estate. Later attempts by residents to drill into the central walls to hang televisions or shelves have resulted in broken drill bits and a strange hollow metallic echoing, but the rooms have never been breached. If the surviving fragments are even partly accurate, then 3 possibilities remain. The first is that the brick voids hold nothing but the rusted, forgotten remains of a failed 19th century industrial experiment, buried out of corporate embarrassment. The second possibility is that the massive mills suffered from a catastrophic acoustic flaw, and the sealed rooms were a desperate, heavy band-aid to prevent the buildings from vibrating themselves into dust. The third possibility points to a forgotten chapter of industrial geology. It suggests that the relentless march of the Industrial Revolution accidentally disturbed something deep within the resonance of the earth, and the only way to survive it was to build a permanent lead-lined tomb to keep it quiet. Maybe the brick fire breaks hid nothing at all. Maybe the missing blueprints were only a mistake. The heat was just a boiler, and the heavy crates held ordinary rubble. But if that is true, why does the architecture still feel like an unfinished cage? Why does one bizarre tax entry still point toward a quarantine no one can identify? And why does the story end not with an answer, but with people sleeping every night, in luxury apartments, entirely unaware of the 60 tons of lead and empty space, waiting silently behind their bedroom walls? If you believe the lead-lined rooms were more than just failed machines, leave your thoughts below. And if you want the next forgotten file pulled from the archive, subscribe before it disappears again.